Hi, my name is LaQuincey Reed, and I'm with Arsenios Corbishley. I'm sorry. And you're a violin maker, and you are also a past artist here at the Skirvin Space. So, Arsenios, go ahead and give an introduction about yourself a little bit better than I did.
Okay, sure thing. Hi, I'm Arsenios Corbishley, and I'm a violin maker and restorer here in Oklahoma City. I was the Skirvin artist resident in 2013, I think. And so now I have a shop where I still make and restore instruments in Midtown.
Okay. So, this don't I want you to take offense about this or anything like that, but you're one of the more you're the most different of
Sure.
all of the artists that have been here. We've had a painter, a sculptor, we've had an encaustic artist, we've had jewelry maker. We haven't had
Sure.
anybody that's done instrument making as part of the artist in residence here. So, what made you decide that you should apply?
It was sort of mostly a factor of like timing for me. I had been working out of my house before that, and that was not very sustainable for me. I was doing more laundry and dishes than I had like my whole freaking life before and after that year of trying to work out of the house. And so I was looking for a studio space, and the application for this residency was due around that time, and so I applied to see what would happen.
So you do violins, correct? And do you do other stringed instruments, or is it mainly the focus is violins? Because I know you played the cello, correct?
Right. Yeah, I was a cellist before I got into this stuff, and I work on bowed string instruments, so violins, violas, cellos, and basses.
Okay.
I don't do anything with frets like guitars or mandolins or any of that stuff.
Okay. So the bigger the instrument, is it harder to work on, or is it all the same?
It's all kind of the same. Bigger instruments like basses definitely have their own struggles just due to the size, the scale of the thing. And as far as like making goes, like I've never made a bass and don't really have any plans on doing that.
Yeah.
Like that's like another level of psycho that I don't want to get into.
Yeah.
But I have made a few cellos, and the difference in like cello making tends to be much more like physical.
Okay.
Than violin making, again, just like due to the size and the scale of what you're doing.
Okay. So before we get too far, we should kind of backtrack and talk about how you actually even got involved with making bowed instrument, because you grew up playing the cello, correct?
Right.
And you went to college to play an instrument as well, correct?
Right.
So how did you get into making the instrument?
Sure. So I got into the field sort of by accident. When I was a senior in high school, I started working at a local violin shop. And I worked there on and off at the end of high school and all through college and a few years after that. While I was in college, I studied cello performance and played in like regional orchestras and did that kind of thing. And like I had every intention of getting a master's in music, but I just kind of wanted a bit of a break from school, and that break turned out to be close to permanent, which is how it goes. But the shop I was working at didn't have anyone that had any formal training, and so it was after a certain point it was kind of time to move on to something different. So I went through an instrument making school in Chicago for 3 years, and then moved back to Oklahoma City and opened my own shop.
Okay. I don't even know, because I don't play an instrument. I know nothing about instruments. I've tried to play the ukulele when I lived in Hawaii, and it was terrible. My
Sure.
my middle school music teacher told me, "Yeah, this isn't your thing." But what I was going to ask is, are there a bunch of instrument makers that are trained like you to do what you do in Oklahoma City?
In Oklahoma, not really. There are in the state. There are a few people that have some like formal training, but mostly Mostly, I think they focus on repair and restoration work.
Okay.
yeah, as far as anyone that actively makes, I think I'm the only person in the state that actively makes.
You're making these instruments. Is everything done traditionally, or do you have people that have special requests that, like, I want an instrument, but I want, like I said, if it sounds dumb, you can just say, I don't want to answer that question because it's dumb. But like, do they say they want a violin, but they want the violin to have like flames or something weird on it or anything like that? Like,
I haven't encountered that yet.
Okay.
I mean, like, anything's possible, I guess.
Yeah.
I will say most violinists, so like the clientele that tends to purchase instruments from me tend to be like college students or kind of younger professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, that crowd tends to want something like at least moderately traditional.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the hold of tradition is quite strong in our field.
Yeah.
And as far as like the process goes, yeah, like the process that I use is like is mostly like a traditional-ish process. I mean, someone like 400 years ago could walk into my shop and like after like trying to figure out what electricity was,
Yeah.
would they would be able to work themselves.
Yeah, they'd probably spend about a couple of days trying to say, so you just press it and it makes that thing
Right.
wrapping their head around that, and then they'd be good to go.
Right. Yeah. Like most of the tools that I use are hand tools.
Yeah.
Chisels, gouges, like little planes, big planes. Yeah, that kind of thing. In my shop, I do have like a decent selection of power tools that I use intermittently, but I mean, with those, like, they're not absolutely essential. They're just a time saver.
Yeah. So whenever you're making instruments, is there a great deal of customization that goes on, or is there just, there's like 3 or 4 different styles and everybody gravitates toward one of those 4 or 5 different styles or whatever? Or is there a great deal of customizations in terms of what you're making?
That is kind of an interesting question. For the most part, most modern makers will take a historic instrument and use that as a model. Mm-hmm. And how close you follow that instrument is kind of up to you. In my making, I don't try to make things that are like exact replicas of like old things. I have some friends that do that very well, and their instruments are beautiful and they sound great. But yeah, I tend to work a little bit looser than that. Okay. And so yeah, like with the instruments that I make, I do have a handful of different models that I use as sort of like a starting point. And as far as like outline and like arching shape and stuff, all the things that kind of make an instrument sound good. Mm-hmm. And then but since like everything's handmade and it's kind of a long process, there's always like something that happens, kinks that like happen where you have to like work around.
Yeah.
And then those the workarounds kind of compound. They can compound, and it all works out in the end. But yeah. It's but I find for myself that if I get too tied to like a specific idea, it's too easy to sort of lose sight of like what I'm actually doing.
Okay. Good deal. So let's talk about your time here at the Skirvin. Whenever you were here, what were some of the things that you kind of learned about? You didn't have your own space. What are some of the things that you learned about having your own space to work?
So as far as that, probably like the biggest holdover from that I've kept from my time at the Skirvin is like the ability to I really refined how I talk about what I do. Mm-hmm. Just because you're doing it so often. Yeah. And kind of having to like take people through like the process like as like efficiently but also as relatively quickly as possible. Yeah. I mean, people like if they just pop in, they don't want to spend like an hour letting me talk at them about something, like yeah. That's no fun for either of us, for anyone involved. And so yeah, like the ability to concisely like talk about what I do.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience having a shop here, because I'd never before or really since been in such like a high traffic area of people that weren't like clients.
Yeah.
You know.
So have you had a lot of? 'Cause I've had so many different types of people come through. I had coaches, and I had salesmen, and people going to conferences, government employees, just all across the spectrum.
Totally.
Do you have people that were doing music as kind of like a hobby, and they came back to you and were wanting to buy instruments later on down the line, or?
I haven't had that particular situation, but I have, but definitely my time here at the hotel, did glean a few like restoration jobs.
Yeah. Okay. So, I guess that's everything that I wanted to ask you about your time here. So let's go ahead and we'll transition. We'll take everything down up here, and we'll go upstairs. We'll go look at the piece that you donated. Does that sound good?
Sure.
All right, let's go ahead and do that.
Let's do it.
All right. So we're here with Arsenios's piece that he donated to the Skirvin. Does it have a title? I don't. Untitled. Okay. So Arsenios, go ahead and tell us about your piece that you donated.
So yeah, this is a violin scroll that I made and that I carved and varnished.
Okay. So I was noticing there's kind of a slight texture on there. Is that something that you normally do for the scrolls of the violins, or is that something that you did specifically?
With a lot of violin makers, a lot of us will intentionally antique our instruments to make them look like they are, say, 100 years older than they are, 400 years older, something like that. I typically don't do that.
Okay.
I tend to make my instruments straight and let time and a musician put all the wear and tear on them that they will. But one common thing with older instruments is that the varnish is crackled a little bit.
So the pegs are the pegs, are those different for different violinists? Do they like different pegs, or?
I mean, honestly, that's like an aesthetic choice.
Okay.
They like functionally, as far as like sound production and that kind of thing, they can have an impact, but it's kind of a subtle one, and it's like there are a lot of factors that affect how an instrument sounds and how it performs, and different materials have different weights, and so like ebony pegs, like this has ebony pegs. Those tend to be very heavy, and lighter pegs, like if you use like boxwood or something, which is super common, those tend to be a lot lighter, and they'll also sound a little bit different. Okay. And like there's no way to tell one sounds this way, the other sounds that way. Like there's too many like factors going into it. So most of the time, like peg selection is like an aesthetic thing.
Okay. And then with the strings.
For the strings, so these are like real violin strings. These particular strings have those particular strings have a synthetic core in the middle, with silver or aluminum wrapping.
Okay.
Historically, historically strings were made out of gut.
Okay.
Usually like sheep intestine or something, and you can still buy strings like that now. They're kind of expensive, but a lot of musicians that focus on like period practice, that like perform like Baroque music on Baroque instruments will use like gut strings, because it's like authentic and it sounds a little bit better for that kind of thing. For most modern players, they're a little too variable, because like they're made out of like intestines. It's like an organic material that expands and contracts quite a bit with humidity, and so like and especially like under as much tension as like a violin string is, they don't stay in tune very well. Yeah. And so like modern steel and modern synthetic strings are like just way more stable.
Okay. See, I told you I knew nothing about violin instruments.
Yeah, like they're way more stable, and also they tend to have what I would call probably a more like modern sound. Like the sound of that is like more appealing to like modern players. So with classical music, like over time, the way like things are like the way things like pieces are performed musically certainly like changes.
Yeah.
And and like every individual player has their own like idea about what sort of sound they want to make. But I have noticed that, especially looking back at like older recordings and stuff, that as like a violin maker, as like a violin restorer, like that's my job, is to make an instrument sound as good as it can. The demands of players change like over time. Yeah. And so like with the different strings, that's just like one of the things that like helps facilitate that.
Okay. So is there anything else you'd like to share about your piece that you donated, or?
I think it looks great, and it's nice to see it hanging up.
All right, good deal. Go ahead and tell us your social media and everything like that, how they can reach you.
All right, well, if you're interested in checking out my work, you can find me on Instagram at Corbishley Violins, and I also have a website, corbishleyviolins.com. I think I have a Facebook page.
If you have an Instagram, you probably
like
have Facebook.
It's there, but like
Yeah.
it's like Instagram's the best place to find me.
All right. Well, thank you so much for visiting with me. I'm pretty sure I'll see you around some way, somehow.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.